Hello developers, in this tutorial we will learn about how to write your first lambda. Some of you might have used lambdas before and some of you already have learned about lambdas, but if you did not dig deeper into them, then you can follow this tutorial. As we already discussed that in object-oriented programming languages, objects and classes are the main entities. So if we create a function, then it should exist within the scope of a class. So a function has no meaning outside the scope of an object in object-oriented programming languages, and in functional programming languages a function can exist outside the scope of an object, and we can assign them to a reference variable, and we can also pass them to other methods as a parameter. So a lambda expression is an anonymous function, that is a function with no name and that is not bound to any identifier. So like I give you an example here. We can syntax of a lambda expression. We can write with like this one, and this arrow represented as a lambda expression. And let's see an example with a real programming that how can we write our first lambda. It might be difficult to understand what lambda is and how to write a lambda without looking at an example. So let's look at an example first. I create a package lambdas. So in this example, I actually create a functional interface known as language. And this language interface has only one method that's known as greeting. I create a greet method. So let's create a two more classes which actually implements this interface. For first one, I create an English language. So I override a greet method. So it outputs good morning for English greeting. I create another class Swedish greeting. Now I create another class well-wisher, which will actually has another method wish, which takes language as a parameter, and based on the type of object passed, it actually prints the greeting. So this class has another method known as wish. I create a static method. It takes language as a parameter, so we can output the greeting. I create another method which will be a static void method. So I use the short keyword, you can see it here. If I press P, SVM and then tab, it's a cool feature in IntelliJ IDEA. So I create a Swedish language class and then pass it to the wish method. So I passed it to the wish method, and I create the another one for English language. Now we run the well-wisher class and see the output. If I build it, it's built successfully, and then I run it. You can see God Morgan for the Swedish language and good morning for English language. So it's a classical example of object-oriented programming languages. So what if our well-wisher class has to greet in all other languages? What should we do? For example, do we need to create a class for each language? Like for Spanish language, for the French language? Is not it possible that we don't create any class and just send a function in the wish method? So for example, if I have to wish in the Hindi language, I have to create another class for a Hindi language, and then I have to implement the interface. And then I implement the method creating. So you can see that our code is quite cumbersome, and it is not so cool that we have to create a lot of classes for this small functionality. So is there any possibility that we don't create any class and just send a function? Yes, this is possible using the anonymous class. So let me show you how. In well-wisher class, I deleted the two instance of classes and we create an anonymous class. And I run it runs successfully. So in the above example, as you can see here, I don't need to create a class for each language. We can use the anonymous class, so it does trick for us. However, don't you think that this code is still cumbersome? Although the class is anonymous one, we are still creating a class. So how can we get rid of creating a classes? So we have another way to do that. Let me show you. I can actually remove this one. So our compiler can understand that a body does not return anything. So mentioning the return type is actually redundant here. So this is our first lambda function. So you can see that how simple is this one. Language interface has only one method. So we don't need to provide the method name and we can simply pass a method here. So it will directly execute that method and we don't need to declare any class. We can make a one more improvement here. Since we have only a one single statement, so we don't need even the curly braces. We can remove them. So our code is running. One more thing that you can remember, that we can actually use the language as a reference variable too, because we are passing the lambda and this language is actually referencing to that lambda function. I copy this one and then I pass like this and it will still function. It was a simple lambda function that we created. See you in the next lecture.